Acts chapter 22. Acts chapter 22, verses 23 through 30. And as they cried out and cast off their clothes and threw dust in the air, the chief captain commanded him to be brought into the castle, and bade that he should be examined by scourging, that he might know wherefore they cried so against him. And as they bound him with thongs, Paul said unto the centurion that stood by, Is it lawful for you to scourge a man that is a Roman, and uncondemned? When the centurion heard that, he went and told the chief captain, saying, Take heed what thou doest, for this man is a Roman. Then the chief captain came and said unto him, Tell me, art thou a Roman? He said, Yea. And the chief captain answered, With a great sum obtained I this freedom. And Paul said, But I was freeborn. Then straightway they departed from him, which should have examined him. And the chief captain also was afraid after he knew that he was a Roman, because he had bound him. On the morrow, because he would have known the certainty wherefore he was accused of the Jews, he loosed him and his bands, and commanded the chief priests and all their council to appear, and brought Paul down and set him before them. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you for this passage. Thank you for the opportunity to consider what the chief captain here considered. Lord, I just pray that you'll help us understand his view, to understand where he was coming from, and to how he dealt with the situation at hand. And Lord, I just pray that you'll help us understand the importance of how people see us from the outside looking in. And Lord, I just pray that you'll help us to see how we can help the situation to people that are not familiar with us. And just I pray. Amen. All right. So in this passage so far here, we have seen that the Jewish people were assuming a lot of things about Paul that were just simply not true. We had seen how that they had thought that he was trying to teach the Jewish people that they shouldn't circumcise their children, shouldn't keep the law of Moses, they shouldn't basically keep the father's traditions, they should not be part of Israel, if you will. And Paul never taught that. What he taught was that the Gentiles did not have to become Jews, the Gentiles did not have to become Israelites, they did not have to go and worship at the temple and do all those things that Jewish people did. He taught that the Gentiles could go directly to Jesus Christ as the Melchizedek high priest. They did not have to go into the nation of Israel as if he were a Levitical priest, because Levitical priests dealt with intercession between the Jewish people and those who joined the Jewish covenant, the covenant of Israel. But because Jesus Christ is a Melchizedek priest who is part of that Old Testament into the New Testament type of priest that is not just under a national covenant, but rather underneath the worldwide covenant of God dealing with salvation. And so in understanding that concept, Paul knew that you did not have to become part of the Israelite nation in order to obtain anything from Jesus Christ and to be right with God in regards to salvation. And because of the dynamics in the Jerusalem church, they had felt that they were the last people who either you were a Gentile who was under the authority of the Romans and the Greeks, because remember, Gentile is basically Jephthah's, you have Noah's children, which is Ham, Shem, and Japheth, and they basically, the Gentiles were Japheth's children. Japheth, if you remember history in Genesis, is that Japheth were the Greeks, the Romans, and all the other Europeans. They were on that side. Of course, Shem was Middle East and Asia, and then Ham was kind of southern Asia a little bit, and also Africa. And so, but at this time, remember, there was the authority, and remember the prophecy of, I believe it was the prophecy given to by Noah to his children, was that Japheth would enlarge his tents and would have authority over Canaan and over Ham. and of course Shem would be an Asian and so forth, and so he wouldn't necessarily have. But the basic thought here is that the Jewish people by this time were the only people worshiping God. So you were either in the Jewish mindset as a religion, and underneath the authority of the Jewish covenant in their mindset, and you worship the Lord. If you didn't worship the Lord, then you were under the authority of the Gentiles, and you lived life after the Gentiles. So oftentimes you would have the Romans who had the authority, and you would have the Greek culture who would have the culture, basically. And so you would live like a Greek, but you would have the authority of the Romans. And so if you lived like a Greek and had the authority of the Romans, they considered you a Gentile. So whether you were a descendant of Ham or Shem, but you were if you were Hellenized, if you will, then you would be a Gentile. If you did not follow after the Lord and you worshipped an idol or something, then you would be a Gentile, because the Gentiles of those the idol worshippers of that time, their culture was Greek and their authority was Roman to the Jewish people, and so that everybody else would be referred to as Gentile. And if you were not Gentile, you would be Jew. And so there was this dynamic situation here. And so they thought that he had gone and taken Gentiles and brought them into the temple. In other words, in their mind, Gentiles are people who worship idols and live ungodly and do ungodly things, and you're going to take them and put them in the most holy place of people that worship the Lord and want to keep it holy, and it has to be sanctified and it has to be cleansed. You're not allowed to have people that worship idols. You're not allowed to have people that are ungodly inside of the temple. And here they see the Asians of the Jewish people there, the Asians from Asia Minor, saw him in the temple, and they freaked out, and because he's there by himself with these Jewish men, and they thought he had brought in Gentile people. And he says in verse 27 of chapter 21, and when the 7 days were almost ended, the Jews which were of Asia, when they saw him at the temple, stirred up all the people and laid hands on him, crying out, Men of Israel, help! This is the man that teacheth all men everywhere against the people and the law in this place, and further brought Greeks also into the temple, and hath polluted this holy place. For they had seen before with him in the city of Timotheus an Ephesian, whom they supposed that Paul had brought into the temple. A lot of people work off supposition. They don't work off of what is actual reality. They make a lot of assumptions about things, and rather than taking the effort to try to study out a matter or search out a matter, they will just take and follow the crowd. They will allow people to stir them up. They will allow people to influence them incorrectly. And that's what the Jewish believers allowed the Asian unbeliever Jews to come in and stir them up with rumors and assumptions about Paul. Because we saw that the Jerusalem church, the elders, even the Jewish Pharisees that believed, they all talked with Paul, and they understood, and they clarified, and they got an understanding. Acts chapter 15, there was a confusion about what Paul was teaching, and confusion about how to enter into the covenant and what to do, and were the Gentiles supposed to become Jews before or after salvation, or not at all. And then they finally decided and realized it was not at all. And then in Acts chapter 21, these rumors had been spreading around about Paul's ministry, that not only was that he teaching the Gentiles that they didn't have to become Jews, but that he was teaching Jews that they didn't have to be Jews. And that was a big problem, because there were a lot of Jewish people in the church that believed. And then verse 21 of chapter 21, they are informed of thee that thou teachest all the Jews which are among the Gentiles to forsake Moses, saying that they ought not to circumcise their children, neither walk after their customs. And so they were informed of the people had made assumptions about them. But then they were assured that Paul was not doing these things by what he was doing in the temple. That's why he was there. But they basically they called out for Israel to help them, and they closed up the temple, and they kicked him out in the court, and they were beating him. And then here is the scene is that there's a big mob of people. They're beating the guy, and they're screaming, "Men of Israel, help! Men of Israel, help! Men of Israel, help!" And then here's tidings come to the centurion in verse 30. And all the city was moved, and the people ran together, and they took Paul and drew him out of the temple, and forthwith the doors were shut, and they went about to kill him. Tidings came unto the chief captain of the band of all Jerusalem that was in an uproar, who immediately took soldiers and centurions and ran down unto them. And when they saw the chief captain and the soldiers, they left beating of Paul. And so here's the scene. The guy's probably having coffee or whatever they drink, or had taken his break, and he's finally going to say, take a quick relaxing break, and then all of a sudden, hey, there's an uproar in the temple. And of course, he's up here in the castle, which is off the side of the Temple Mount, basically, and there's the temple, and then there's the temple courtyard, and then off to the side is the castle, or the fort, if you will. It's basically a tower off the side of the thing, and depending on whose geology you believe, it's actually, the fort is actually the modern Temple Mount, and the old Temple Mount was somewhere off to the other side. And however you want to look at that, basically, we're not really looking into geology and stuff right now, because it doesn't matter. He was close by. He was close by enough to, by the time the mob was beating him, to stop and save him from getting killed. And then he's like, what's going on here? Why are you guys fighting? You're all Jews here. What's going on? Oh, there must be a terrorist. Hey, on my reports, and I've been fighting, I'm trying to find this guy who is a terrorist. Maybe they found him, and maybe they captured him, and finally, I'm going to find this terrorist. And he says, who immediately the soldiers and the centurions and ran down, took soldiers and centurions and ran down unto them. And when they saw the chief captain, they left off beating of Paul. Then the chief captain came near and took him and commanded him to be bound with 2 chains, and demanded who he was and why he had done. Now he's looking in on the situation. These guys, these most definitely religious, holy people, are beating up a guy, trying to kill a guy. You usually think of, you don't get called out as a police officer. You don't get called out to church to see a bunch of people trying to beat up somebody and think that the guy they're trying to beat up is a good guy. You think he's a bad guy, right? Usually that's the typical thing. What did this guy do? Did he try to shoot at the place? What's going on? What is going on? And he's trying to figure this out. Some cried one thing, some another among the multitude, and when he could not know the certainty for the tumult, he commanded him to be carried into the castle. Now, oftentimes, when people looking in on a situation, on a church or on a religion or on a culture, they can't figure out, why are these people who are supposed to be of the same religion all fighting one another and spiting one another and hating people even more than lost people? I mean, here he is. He's trying to figure out, why are these this guy who looks like he had just shorn his head and he had just given, he looks like a Nazarite that typically goes into the temple and so forth. But why are they beating this guy? What's going on? And when he's trying to figure out what's going on, one of the groups says, "Oh, this is why we're fighting. This is why we're arguing." Another part of the group says, "This is why we're fighting. This is why we're arguing." And they're all different. Everybody's trying to make an excuse for why their position is right and why everybody else is wrong. And then the people over here, they make a completely different argument, and they argue against them and against everybody else. And when people look in, oftentimes on organized religion, they say, why do I want to have a part in that? I don't want to beat the guy they're beating up, and I don't want to beat them up. I just want to know what's going on. So oftentimes, the lost world is confused about what is religion about if they're always preaching about what is right and what is good and what God wants of you, but then they don't do as they preach. And the lost world just trying to live life, just trying to live by the law. He's not a bad person, not a good person, just somebody who understands the culture he's living in. He understands the law of the land, and he's trying to figure out, why are these people they preach one thing and they do another, and they can't give a straight answer for why they have a tradition, why they hate a certain group of people, why this, why that. And also, as a kid growing up, when I heard that there were camps among Baptist people, and that person couldn't fellowship with that person, or this person over here was a heretic, that, and this person over there was held the wrong belief, this, and we can't associate with him because that guy associates with this guy, which this guy isn't that bad, but this guy is really bad, and because he associates with him, we can't associate with him, and this guy over here associates with this guy who associates with that guy, and so we can't associate with this guy either. And it's like, where does the chain end? And as a kid, I was like, aren't we all Christians? Don't we love Jesus? Don't we follow and read the same Bible? Why can't we get along? That was my thought as a little kid. I was like, why can't we get along? Now, obviously, now that I've grown and matured and know why this guy is wrong over here, why that guy is wrong over there, and why this guy over there is wrong, and why I can't fellowship with that guy, now I know for sure, and I understand. It's like that's kind of how we get up into. Once we figure out where our group is, then we get into the group think, and then everybody outside of our little group is an enemy. And it even gets so bad that oftentimes that suddenly everybody starts losing their salvation little by little, except for your group. Eventually some of the people in your group start losing their salvation. And mysteriously, you're the only one that's left, that's saved. What's going on? What happened? Did Gray follow you away? And so oftentimes people imagine a greater falling away than there is. And they oftentimes imagine a thing of their own heart's content. They suppose a lot of things about other people. And the thing about this is this guy looking in on this, all he saw was a bunch of Jews trying to beat up another Jew that seemed just as religious as they were. And so he must have figured, hey, maybe it's not really a Jew. Maybe he's a hidden evil man, a man who's trying to kill people. Was that the case? No. Paul was just a guy who loved the Lord. He made the case in chapter 22 about him being a good, righteous, humble Jew, and that the people that brought him to Christianity were also Jews, and that he had continued in this humble life, and God had called him to live a life of preaching the gospel and being a light unto the Gentiles, and everything about him they liked, except for one thing: the fact that God called him to preach to Gentiles, and then that freaked them out. And because here's the thing: is the Jewish people were fine with people that were Gentiles becoming Jews and then receiving Christ. By this time, there was an uneasy alliance between the Jewish Christians, because the Jews were no longer, the high priest was no longer trying to send people to execute them. They're openly worshiping in the temple, and they're openly fellowshipping with all the other Jews, and they're having communication one with another, and there's kind of this uneasy settlement of, well, if you want to believe in Jesus as your Messiah, you go right ahead. We'll just keep the peace, and then everything will be good. And a lot of times, Christians, instead of being at odds with everybody, and not wanting to be in fellowship with that group because they're not with the truth, and they're not with the truth, and instead of doing that, they go to the completely opposite direction, and they just want to say, well, we're not even going to mention that situation. We're not even going to mention that situation. And I understand there's importance of, a lot of times people either in doctrine, they say doctrine is very important, the truth is very important, which it is. Therefore, I'm going to divide from all heresy, which is a good thing to do. You should divide from heresy. But then there's the other group that says, well, fellowship and unity is very important, and it is. And they say, hey, we're just not going to bring up these situations. We're not going to deal with these situations. We're not going to process these situations. Now, I understand there's always a lot of opinions and things that for the sake of unity in the church, we're not always going to be bringing up. We have different opinions on certain things that I've talked to people about, and we see prophecy sometimes a little different. Some of us may say, hey, you know, in that parable about that Jesus gave about the seeds, I think only the one that was on the good ground, only those were the ones that were saved. And then another group says, no, only the one that fell on the hard ground, only they were saved. And it's all about discipleship. And we can have a different opinion. People can have a different opinion on what they thought that prophecy meant. And it's just something of learning the Bible a little bit more, trying to figure out the correct answer and whatnot. And you can have a difference of opinion as you learn and grow together. But then there's oftentimes people that come along and say, well, you know, that whole virgin birth thing, you know, that's just not really a true thing. And if they insist on that, then sorry, I got to divide from you, because that's divinity. That's there's some things you just cannot just kind of, well, we'll just set that aside and not worry about it. But so oftentimes people do that. They'll set a lot of things aside. Well, how does God want you to live your life? How does God want you to, you know, I know God said that's an abomination, but we're just going to ignore that. They can just live in the church in fornication and these different things. And so one will have extreme unity, another will have extreme division, but then we forget to have this unity with the truth. And as we unite around the truth, we seek places for unity and for people to be united to the truth. That's how we ought to live our life and try to draw people back to the truth. So oftentimes we want to have this division and so forth. And looking in, people are asking the question, well, aren't you following the same Savior? Don't you have the same Master? You know, sometimes we want to tell everybody how to follow Jesus, but we're not following Jesus. We all need to follow Jesus together, and then that creates the unity. Sometimes people think the majority thing that we're trying to do is to have unity, and so we ignore everything else for unity. Other people say, well, truth is what we need to sit around, and that's all we should ever have, and that's what we need to sit around, because if somebody's not true. But the thing is that what we sit around is not truth, which is very important, in unity, which is also very important, but we center around Christ. And then Christ, because we center around Christ, His truth is important to us. And because we center around Christ, His unity is very important to us. So if you can see the difference is where your focus is on Christ, then His truth becomes a uniting factor. But then if you're focused only on truth as a universal concept, then your focus is not on Christ and His Spirit. If you're focused only on unity and the uniting factor of all of humanity or one blood and all this stuff, which is true, your focus is not Christ. But you see, we're all servants of Christ, and that's where our focus ought to be. But here in this passage, he says, some cried one thing, some another. What is the main majority reason why you come together? Well, what's the centering focus? Some cry, truth above all else. Others cry, unity above all else. And others cry, love above all else. And if you don't love me, I hate you. And righteous anger and hate above all else. And the confusion there to somebody looking in is great. And they're like, well, they don't know true love. They don't know who they're worshiping. They claim to be worshiping Christ, but they're not. And they just like, I don't want to have any part of that. If I have to fellowship with these people in order to believe in Jesus, then I don't want to believe in Jesus. You see, that can become a stumbling block to a lot of people. Especially for, in this case, somebody who is a centurion who was there to keep the peace and there to keep the law. Somebody who is a very moral and upright, upstanding person will look in and say, I thought these people were supposed to preach righteousness. Where's the righteousness? Where's the peace? Where's the unity? They claim to follow Jesus, but they don't. They're all fighting and bickering, and they have different doctrines, and they're all confused. Among the multitude, when he could not know the certainty for the tumult. Do you allow oftentimes things that are dividing and may be important, yes, but do you allow them to, in a public area, when you're busy fighting over doctrine or busy fighting over this, that, or the other thing, where the public can see you, if you will, or where the public has a determining factor in what's going on, are you allowing them to see Christ? Or are you allowing them to see how important this little issue in my life is? Or what are you allowing them to see? In this tumult, the grace of Christ did not come out of it because nobody was focused on Christ. Everybody was focused on their assumptions. And everybody was focused on their little pet argument within their own little group. But you see, the certainty for the tumult, he commanded them be carried into the castle. So he's like, hey, there's one of him, and there's a bunch of them, so I'm just going to remove him from the situation. A lot of times police officers do that. Like there becomes a mob, and somebody's doing, they're doing their First Amendment right by preaching out and speaking out on the street, and they have a right to preach on the street, but then the mob who wants to shut them down is trying to become restless. They oftentimes will ask the person who is in the right to leave the situation rather than telling the crowd to calm down, because they want to remove the source of anxiety, the source of not keeping the peace. The police officers are more concerned with peace than your rights, so that's just another side note. They are more concerned with keeping the peace, so oftentimes they'll violate your rights in order to simplify their life, and they're not out to get you. They just don't want to take the big effort of trying to stop a crowd when they could just stop one person. But anyway, that's not necessarily for this message. And when he came upon the stairs, so it was that he had borne the soldiers for the violence of the people. For the violence of the people. Think about this. They're in the most holy place on earth, and yet they can't get their message straight. They're working off of assumptions, and they are violent. They are being violent. And they cannot have a centralized voice. And so oftentimes, this is what people looking in on Christianity see. Whereas they should be seeing unity and how Christ says to be of one spirit, of one faith, of one baptism, and so forth. That everybody wants to be of different minds about this. And here's the thing: I'm not trying to call, we should all be in unity with the Catholics, or we should all be unity with this. No, we should be all unity with this. This is why we in this church read the Bible and say, what does the Bible say for us to do? That's what we ought to do. We don't look to see who's joining to one doctrine or dividing over another doctrine, or what the reputation of such and such a person is, or the reputation of something. There are a lot of people in our Baptist circles that are not accepted in a lot of camps, and they're badly spoken about. And yeah, they'll have wrong doctrine here, wrong doctrine there. But our goal here at the church is that if there is something that we can unite around is preaching the gospel and pointing people to Christ, and we're going to do that. If it benefits the body of Christ, that's what we're going to try to do. And he came upon the stairs, so it was that he was born of the soldiers for violence of the people. For the multitude of the people followed after, crying, "Away with him! Away with him!" And Paul was led into the castle, and he said unto the chief captain, "May I speak unto thee?" See, this is the interesting thing about Paul. Even in the midst of just getting beat up, his focus is not on they violated my rights. Hey, they hurt me. They beat me up. Send the law down on them. Hello, sir. May I talk to you about Jesus? That was Paul's attitude here. Look at this. He says, and Paul to be led into the council, he said unto the chief captain, "May I speak unto thee?" And he's like, "Whoa, you're speaking to me? You're talking to me?" Sometimes people are so focused on their little infighting thing going on here that they don't think to stop and ask somebody about their soul. Person I'm arguing about on the internet, have I checked to see if they're saved? Or am I busy fighting about this little topic? How do I view their soul? Do I view them as an enemy because they don't agree with me on a certain thing? Or do I say, hey, this is an important question, and I see you disagree with me, but what about your internal soul? Well, what about, can I talk with you? Rather than talking at you about a certain thing, rather than talking past you about a certain thing, rather than looking and saying, hey, what you think is wrong, that evolution thing you believe in is wrong, hey, that thing over here is wrong. No, remember when Paul was on Mars Hill, he took them from where they were, and they're wanting to hear some new thing and some frivolous thing or whatever, and he took them and followed that from God as the creator, and how that God has judged them, and how that and then he brought them over to Christ, and how that Christ had come and died for them. And this is what Paul does here, is he kind of draws him from this tumult where everybody is busy fighting and bickering about every little thing and mad at him, trying to kill him, to not trying to defend himself to him, but may I speak unto thee? You know, how oftentimes we need to just stop and just speak to the person that we're fighting or arguing about or have a difference of opinion. So oftentimes I look at an argument or a debate, and it seems like it goes, like if it's a certain topic, it'll always hit the same old tired arguments that never worked, but it's all the talking points that everybody talks about. It's like, for example, the King James Bible versus the modern versions. They'll go from Vaticanus, Sanicanus, and then one side will say, well, you know, they took out those verses, and the other side will be, no, they put them in. And then another side will say, well, you know, this word should have been good and not goodness. You know, and some minor crazy little details, and they're arguing, bickering about all the small little details, and everybody else is like, what in the world are you guys talking about? You know, because they're just rehashing all the old stuff. They're not talking to each other. They're not trying to get to the center of the point. They're all busy about defending themselves and not trying to look for the truth. And they just need to learn how to speak to each other as human beings. Not about people winning a debate, not about defending somebody. I was talking to a person that is close to me in a lot of doctrine, but I wanted to have a conversation with him. But then he says, well, I'm going to make my argument this, and I'm going to make my argument that. I was like, forget about all that. Let's just talk and have a productive conversation. Forget about trying to present a defense. Just have a conversation with me. Just treat me like a human being, not as somebody to defend a point with, or argue about, or win something with. Just speak with me. Who said, canst thou speak Greek? You speak the same language I speak? You know, hey, a little bit ago you're all busy fighting all over this religious stuff and everything. And so oftentimes people, there's oftentimes that religious people, they want to use fancy words. They want to use weird sounds. They want to use weird terminology. They just need to speak to somebody like a normal person. You know, when I talk to a doctor in the doctor's office, I don't want to hear about all these weird medical terms and have to learn a new language. I want to just know. I don't want to know if the dialectic, phylactic, whatever, tuminolic, or some Greek, whatever made up word that I hear. I just want to, oh, you mean those Greek fancy words just mean my blood pressure's high? You know, they have some word, whatever, diaphylactic shock, I don't know. Anyway, and so he says, canst thou speak Greek? Art thou not that Egyptian, which before those days made us an uproar, and led us out the wilderness 4,000 men that were murderers? So oftentimes people see how we're treated, and they see all the busy religious garbage going on out there, and when you speak to them like a person, they're shocked. Like, what in the world? You're actually talking to me? You're not treating me like a statistic. You're not treating me like a liberal. You're not treating me like a Republican or a Democrat or abortionist or anything like that. And you're not treating me like some pet argument or anything. You're actually speaking to me. See, that's the problem with a lot of people. Is when they knock on that door, they're not speaking to the person. They're not speaking their language. They're speaking above them. I know this, and I have a deeper connection to God. And if you just were with me, you would have a greater connection. And if you weren't with those heretics over there, those cultists over there, you would have a greater connection to God. And they just speak a different language. Canst thou speak Greek? Can't you just speak like an English person? Well, nowadays it'd be like, oh, it's all Greek to me. Can't you just speak English? Can't you just speak the tongue of the common people? And then in verse 38, the guy is asking, the way you have been treated, the way you act, you seem like a bad person. You seem like an evil man. The way people treat their brothers in Christ oftentimes will make people look at the world and say, hey, are you a bad person? Are you Jim Jones? Did you try to cause people to drink a bunch of Kool-Aid and kill themselves out in the wilderness? You know, that's the way people try to treat their brothers, because they don't agree with one group of brother or another group of brother. They want to make it look like, to the world in fact, and to anybody who will listen, that brother that they don't like is actually the devil. You know, and when in reality they're both saved, they both agree with the basic tenets, and 99% of their doctrine is all the same. And yet they want to publish to the world about how evil and wicked that person is. And then when somebody looks in and you're trying to give them the gospel, the rumors and the lies and the ideas that are presented about you make them think, well, maybe this guy should not be trusted. You see, your effort to demonize your brother hampers his effort to win the lost to Christ. So the way you treat others in the eyes of the world especially, yes, we're going to have difference of opinion. Yes, we're going to have heated arguments. Yes, we're going to have times when we just disagree and we cannot fellowship with a brother. But how do you treat a brother that you can't fellowship with? How do you treat a brother that is under church discipline? How do you treat them? Do you treat them like Christ would treat somebody? Do you treat them as a saved believer in Christ, but just somebody who is different than you? Sometimes you're not going to be able to fellowship, and you're not going to be able to even associate with a certain person. And in fact, that person may not be somebody you would even want to be close to, but you don't want to cause the world to stop. If that guy is trying to live for Christ, now obviously if he needs to be disciplined, he needs to be disciplined. If he needs to be chastised, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about somebody who is trying to win souls to Christ, trying to be Christ-like in the best way he knows how, even if in flawed human error. I, as a Christian, need to treat him as a Christian brother. I, as a Christian, need to make sure that when people look at him, they don't see a terrorist. They see Christ. He says, "Art thou not that Egyptian, which before these days made us an uproar and led us out the wilderness, 4,000 men that were murderers?" And Josephus says about this man is that this guy, what he had tried to do was that he led an uproar, and these guys, these Egyptian men were going to take over and destroy the temple of God. They were going to take over the Temple Mount, and they were going to hold it hostage, basically, and that they were going to destroy the worship of God there. So 4,000 heathen Egyptians were going to try to do that. And so what this guy thought was, hey, you know, these guys must have something big on you. You must be some evil man for them to want to kill you in the temple courts. Aren't you that guy who tried to destroy the temple? And no, just a godly Christian man trying to not only is he not a terrorist trying to destroy the temple, he was in the temple for 6.5+ days, possibly almost into 7, that he was living as a Nazarite, the most holy of holy, cleansed Jewish people there ever was a Nazarite. And yet the way these Jewish people talked about him and the way he understood the situation was that he was this guy who tried to destroy the whole temple the way they were acting. Does your attitude towards your brother make the world think that the guy that's trying to destroy you is the guy trying to destroy Christianity or some sort of thing, but in reality he's just somebody who's trying to bring people to Christ? So you got to be careful in how you present your brother and those around you, the fellow Christians, even if you don't agree with them, to the world. You may not even be able to fellowship with them. But Paul said, "I am a man. I'm just a man. I'm not some crazy dude. I'm just a man." You need to relate to people, speak their language, and talk to them, and speak with them one-on-one, and let them know that you're just a man. You're not some crazy evil person. You're not somebody who is a fanatic. You're just a man. He says, "I am a man which is a Jew of Tarshish, a city in Cilicia, a citizen of no mean city." I'm not a heathen. I'm not a ruffian. I'm a godly man from a prestigious city who has great respect among the community. And he had given him, and then he says, "I beseech thee, suffer me to speak with to the people." I want to speak. I want to have a dialogue. And when the people looking in, and they realize that, hey, this person doesn't want to fight and bicker and argue, they want to speak with the people. I'm just out here door knocking. I'm just trying to talk to my neighborhood. I'm talking to friends. I'm not some crazy person. I grew up around here, or I was part of this group, or I'm from such and such a place. He says, I am a Jew born in Tarshish. And here's the thing. And then in chapter 22, of course, he switches from Greek to Hebrew, and he speaks to them one-on-one as people. These people just try to kill him, and he gives them the gospel. What do you do to the people that hate you, that appear to be Christian, but maybe they're not? They appear to be in the same circles, but maybe they're not. They're not saved or something. They seem to have a form of godliness, but turn away from the power thereof. How do you treat them? Do you treat them as somebody who needs to be evangelized, or you treat them as some heretic that needs to be cursed and justifies your reason for not acting Christ-like towards them? So he gives them this message, and they're listening intently, and this guy is looking in. Oh, these guys seem to be calm now. You know, the tumult's over. Maybe this guy is reasoning with them. They're shaking their heads. Yes, this is true. That's true. Oh, yes, I remember that. I remember that guy. That's you? That guy who got letters and persecuted that way and so forth. Oh, okay, you're one of us. You defending the faith and oh, that Jesus is our Messiah. Oh, that's an interesting thought. You know, maybe he is. Wait a second. This Jesus of yours sent you to the Gentiles? How dare you? How can such a thing be? And they allowed their doctrine and their heresy and their assumptions to well back up in them. But here's the thing, and then in verse 23, in chapter 22, and they cried out and cast off their clothes and threw dust in there. Here's this guy, he probably only speaks Greek. He's just fresh out of Greece or wherever he was from, and he's been positioned in this foreign nation as a protector, a chief captain over the armies there, and then now this guy who had just gotten beat up, he thought he was perhaps a terrorist. Now speaking to these guys in Hebrew. At first he thought it was an Egyptian. Now he's speaking to them in Hebrew, and then they seem to be shaking their head. They seem to be doing a good job, and then all of a sudden he hears one word that he's familiar with, Gentile. You know, every Gentile in Israel learns that Hebrew word, Gentile, because that's who they are. In Taiwan, the thing we learn about and hear oftentimes is white goren. It's basically means white devil. so the foreigners that were the Americans were white goren, white devils, people that are not the same, you know. But anyway, it's a term of affection now. So, but anyway, they cried out and cast out their clothes and threw dust in the air. And notice this, he says, "Away with such a fellow from the earth, for it is not fit that he should live." Sometimes that people get so upset and allow assumptions about a certain person, and they're not willing to investigate, and they're so set in a certain thing about a certain person that they publish and speak out and scream even on the internet or wherever you hear it, or even sometimes in churches. "Away with such a fellow from the earth, for he is not fit that he should live." Now here's Jew shouting to another godly Jew that he shouldn't live, he should die, he should be killed, and in fact they tried to kill him. Do you allow things to get such in your community that you want to kill your brother in Christ rather than correct your brother in Christ? You know, see, we as Christians, even when we correct one another, it's to restore fellowship eventually. Even when somebody's disciplined and refuse to hear you, they're cast out of the church, of course, but even then, it's once they are humbled, we seek their restoration. So oftentimes Christians don't care about restoration. They just care about being right. And, you know, obviously you should be right. You should join with the rightness. But you understand what I'm saying, of course, is that you should continue a godly Christian spirit even when you don't agree with a brother in Christ, even when you think that guy perhaps maybe is a heretic or whatever it is. Because, you see, even Paul, before he was saved or converted to the New Testament there, is he sought to solve the problem, the Christian problem, or the heretics of the Jews, that sect of the Jews. He tried to solve that problem by hurting and killing and insulting and maiming and blaming and blaspheming and abusing. But then when he got saved, you don't see a single passage anywhere. Well, of course, he tells the Jewish the Jewish sorcerer when he's trying to hinder the gospel. May God blind you. Don't see for a season. He did that sort of thing. But as far as trying to curse somebody and blaspheme them, he just told somebody to stop hindering the gospel. That's about the most extreme he got to somebody other, and so we as Christians, if somebody's trying to hinder the gospel, that's where you perk up. That's where you say, stop trying to hinder the gospel. Stop trying to do those things. Don't do those things. But we're doing it so that they'll not hinder the gospel, not because we're so mad at them or we hate them or anything. We just don't like what they're trying to do to the gospel. Trying to keep people from getting saved. Well, they cast out their clothes and they threw dust in the air, and the chief captain commanded him to be brought into the castle and bade that he should be examined by scourging. Oh, this is a very American thing here. Enhanced interrogation. Hey, we're gonna get down to the answer to this. We're gonna figure out what you believe. We're gonna do this by enhanced interrogation. And this is their enhanced interrogation. We don't know what's going on, but we're going to investigate. We're going to make sure we know what's going on. Because see, he's operating on the assumption that this guy's an evil terrorist. He's a Jim Jones. He's going to send him to prison. He's going to find out where all the victims are. But then he finds out that not only is this guy a Jew, not only is this guy somebody who speaks to him in Greek, and not only does this person care about him, and he preaches and cares about the people that even try to beat him up, he says that he's also, in verse 25, is it lawful for you to scourge a man that is a Roman and uncondemned? He also knows his rights. See, the first thing, the primary thing that Paul is concerned about is speaking to people like they're human beings. Speaking to people that need the gospel. The people that just tried to kill him, they needed the gospel, they needed to be converted. And the Roman, he needed the gospel, he needed to be converted. So he spoke to them like a human being. He spoke to them and he desired his salvation. And here, the guy is trying to do something that is illegal for him to do. A lot of times when a police officer comes up to you and says, well, I'm not going to let you preach the gospel anymore. I'm not going to let you do this anymore. I'm not going to let you do that anymore. And it goes against your rights as an American. Are you going to say, hey, is it lawful for you to prevent me from my First Amendment rights? Is it lawful for you to try to detain me without having a reason? Is it lawful for me to do these things? You see, his focus was on preaching the gospel of Christ. He wasn't caught up on all these infighting among the camps and all these little things. Are these things oftentimes that people fight about important? Yes, they are. But is that what we should spend our energies on? Or should we dwell with unity? You see, a lot of these arguments and fights are people outside of your local church oftentimes. And the bad and sour attitudes. And the thing is that we're supposed to be united within the church. We're supposed to have love for the brethren inside of the church. And even when we disagree, we're supposed to have love and unity within the brethren. And that focus needs to be on presenting the gospel. Here in this passage, we see that they were not focused on the salvation of their fellow Jews. They were not focused on the salvation of the Roman. They were just focused on Greek versus Jew. They were focused on Gentile versus Jew. They were focused on Jesus versus Jew. Me versus Jew. And they got so crazy that they even cast off their clothes. Here's a bunch of supposedly religious people doing something ungodly as being immodest in a crowd, because they were so angry. They allowed their anger to cause them to not be righteous, godly people. And we should never allow that. See, the chief captain commanded them to be brought, and he says he's a Roman and uncondemned. Oh, you're an American. You're not a foreign. You're not an undocumented immigrant or whatever. He says the centurion heard that he went and told the chief captain, saying, "Take heed what thou doest, for this man is a Roman." Oftentimes when somebody knows their rights, take heed what thou doest, for this guy knows what his rights are. And this guy knows what to do as right. He knows the Constitution. He knows what's right. Now, notice he didn't argue and fight over, I have my rights and this and that, and I'm a traveling citizen, and I'm a sovereign citizen. No, he just says, I'm a Roman, and I'm not condemned. He didn't try to make up some weird, obscure thing. He says, it'd be like us saying today, I'm an American, and I have a right to be here. I'm an American, and I have a right, this license gives me a right to drive this vehicle, or this gives me a license to do this, I have permission to do that, and so forth. And we know our rights, and we expect our rights. And so when the centurion heard, he went and told the chief captain, he said, take heed what thou doest, for this man is a Roman. Let them know that you are the same as them. See, when he was with the Jewish people, he let them know that he was just like them. He tried to emphasize their similarities and their commonalities rather than their differences. Were there differences? Yeah. But see, with the Jewish people, he says, hey, I'm a Jew, but the only difference is that I have Jesus as my Messiah. With the Roman, he says, I'm a Roman, but I'm also a Jew. I'm a Roman, but I'm also a Christian. You see, he emphasizes that thing. And when we go door knocking, we go soul winning, what do we do oftentimes? We were both sinners. We tell them, hey, we were both sinners. Now, are you saved and you're going to heaven, and that person's lost and going to hell? Yeah, and we don't go to knock on the door and say, hey, you're lost and going to hell, and therefore, no, we say, hey, we were all lost and going to hell. We present our commonalities rather as a means of solving our differences. So we need to understand that there is a right way to solve our differences, and there's a wrong way to solve our differences. Is the truth important? Yes. Is the truth so important that we should eagerly look for all the differences so that we can divide over it? Or is the truth so important to you that you as a person should live by the truth and not violate the truth because somebody is violating your truth? You see, we should see what the truth tells us how to live, and then we see where they're not, and we see the areas where they are not aligned with the truth. And rather than saying, well, no, I'm going to divide from you, how can you show them where you guys are same, and how can you guide them, who is your brother in Christ, back to the truth? See, rather than causing one person saying this, one person saying that, they find the commonality, speak to them like people, and then solve your differences. If you're wrong and you're not with the truth, you get back to the truth. If they're wrong and they're not with the truth, and because you share their commonality, it's more likely that they will join back with the truth and be corrected. But when you cause the differences, hey, you at the door, you're lost and going to hell, and lucky you, I'm here to save you. Is that going to solve your problems? The guy just woke up, he's like 9:30, he's sleeping in, he had a late night at work or whatever, or even if he's a worldly person, partying all night, and now he's hungover on Saturday morning, and then you knock on his door in a shrill voice telling him that he's lost and dying and going to hell, and that you're this righteous person going to save him, he's going to slam that door in your face. But if you say, hey, brother, how was your night last night? Oh, you were doing this, that, and the other thing? Oh, wonderful. Or it's like, oh, I would like to talk to you. We're out here inviting you to church, and you're just being friendly with them. And you're talking about how long you've been living in the neighborhood. We're your neighbor. We go to church here in this neighborhood. Oh, yeah, this is my neighborhood church guy. I saw that church on the corner there, and I was wondering who was the pastor, or I was wondering who went there, and what the type of people were, and I've been thinking about going there. Yeah, we're a wonderful group of people. This is what we do. And you get that commonality going. We're reasonable people. We're human beings. And then you present the gospel saying, hey, this is something that you need. And we present things in unity. We don't present things for division. And then he goes on and moves on. He says, the chief captain answered, with a great sum obtained I this freedom. And Paul says, but I was freeborn. He's talking about his Roman. He's talking about their common thing. What was the common thing he had with the Roman? He was a Roman citizen, and Paul was a Roman citizen. Well, how did you become a Roman citizen? Well, this is how I became a Roman citizen. Or if somebody brings up the fact, oh yeah, I'm a Catholic. Or oh yeah, I'm a Jehovah's Witness. So you say, well, those 144,000, they really are going to heaven, and you're a woman now that you can't go to heaven. Because, no, what do? Say, oh, you believe in you believe to be a Christian or whatever, and hey, this is what you read the Bible, you believe in God, and this is what the Bible says. This is what God says about salvation. This is what God says. See, you look for the unity to unite them to God. You don't look for the divisions to turn them off to God. And that's what Paul did in all these things. You know, when they were focused on division and violence, he was focused on unity and peace. Not to himself, but to Jesus and Jesus' truth. They straightway they departed when they should be examined him. Chief captain also was afraid, for he knew that he was a Roman, because he had bound him. You know, he was ashamed of what the wrong things he had done to Paul. On the morrow, because he would have known certainty whereof he was accused of Jews, he loosed him and his bands, and he commanded the chief priests and all their councils to appear, and brought Paul down and set him before him. See, because how Paul had conducted himself with this chief captain caused this chief captain go from somebody who thought that Paul was a terrorist and this evil person to somebody who says, I want to know more about why these people hate him. I want to know more about why he follows after this person called Messiah or Christ. Or I want to learn more, and I'm going to figure out the situation. See, when the chief captain first started out, he's just drinking tea or whatever, coffee or whatever, having a break in the fort, wondering why he's in this crazy town with a bunch of religious freaks. And then he goes from there and thinking, oh, the religious freaks are being attacked by a terrorist. I got to go save and rescue these crazy people. To one of, they're talking to him. He's getting across to them. He's talking to them in their own tongue. He's talking to them like a human being. These people that tried to kill him, he's talking to them like human beings, that even though they tried to kill him, and he's talking to them in their language. He talked to me in my language. He talked to me politely, and even just after getting beat up and almost killed, he's talking to me politely, and he's talking to them politely. And then he comes out and he sees, I think maybe these guys are mad at him because he probably is a terrorist. Maybe they're right. And then he stands up for his own rights. And he's like, oh, okay. And so he not only gets familiar with him, he starts to learn to respect him. And then when he respects him, he, instead of abusing this relationship, he has a respectable relationship with him. Oh, I'm going to beat him up and find out what's going on here. Hey, what's going on? I'll grab you by the cuff. What's going on? Why are you at my door? Why are you doing these things? No, instead of having the attitude of, why are you at my door? How dare you? Somebody becomes, oh, okay, that's the gospel. Oh, okay, maybe I should investigate eternal life. Maybe I should investigate where I'm going to go after I die. I need to investigate, hey, the religious people over here believe this. You believe that? Who's right? What's going on here? See, it goes from a point of disagreement to a point of unity and respect. See, that's what we need to do, just like Paul did from this chief captain. From the outside looking in, he sees these crazy religious freaks all fighting around, to maybe I should investigate, see what's going on. Maybe I should investigate, and maybe Christ is important. Maybe somebody I should get to know. How do we conduct ourselves with the brethren? How do we conduct ourselves where people can see us from without? Do we allow them in all points, even if they think we're these crazy freaks, and when they get to know us as human beings, that they get to be respectable to respect us, and then they get to see Christ in us rather than just crazy, bickering, fighting heathens? Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you, bless you, give us, Lord. I pray that you'll continue to guide and help us as we do your will. Help us to follow you in all things and live after your life, Lord, and that when people see us, that they see Christ and his righteous life and how he respected and loved people and talked to people like humanity, and he would talk to the harlot and he would talk to the publican, and he would say they would be going in before all the self-righteous people, Lord, to heaven. Lord, I just pray that you'll help us to realize the important fact that even heretics are human beings and they need Christ. Lord, I just pray that you'll help us to understand the difference between somebody who is evil and somebody who is just in need of Christ, and that we will seek unity in Christ rather than dividing over every little detail to the point of hindering the lost from coming to you. Lord, I pray that you'll help us to be chosen vessels of you. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.